Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Biz Essentials podcast. I'm your host, Veronica, and today we're going to be talking to Brison C. He is the host of the Productivity podcast. And today he's going to be talking to us on how to establish a productivity routine that'll be just right for you. Let's hear what he has to say.
Tony Robbins once said, "No matter how many mistakes you make or how slow you progress, you are still way ahead of everyone who isn't trying." This is the Biz Essentials. You want to grow, get ahead, keep the spark. Here you'll get valuable insights and empowerment to grow personally and professionally. Isn't it about time you turn your dreams into successful passion projects? Learn how to be productive, be successful, be joyful, and more importantly, be yourself. The Be Essentials. This is the Biz Essentials. And this is your host, Veronica of Veronica Ventures.
I understand you have a podcast called the Productivity Podcast. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that and a little bit about yourself?
My name is Brison C. I run the Productivity Podcast, like you said. It's a podcast all about getting things done very efficiently. Efficiency is key, and same with simplification. I work pretty hard every week. Every Monday, I get out an episode to discuss what I've learned about productivity, what I already know about productivity, and what I'm working on regarding it. Trying to create a very simple process that can work for a lot of different people to really help them get things done.
That makes a lot of sense. I know I often have a lot of things to do, but getting them done is a whole different story. And so what kind of tips, tricks, tools, and strategies have worked for you? Or what do you encourage your viewers to do?
Like the tips and tricks thing is a very interesting debate in the productivity scene, because me personally, I don't think that there is any necessarily like tips the same way that I would describe there is as whole principles. So you have to kind of build your system not off of these small, minute, like almost toothpick sized bits of information, such as I format my calendar in the specific way. Things like these nitpicky things are very personal, and they can change how you work, but really, because of how personal they are, they don't tend to work for a wide variety of people. And any small tip I throw out like that really can get tossed by the wayside by about 95% of people. What is more important is, like I said, principles. So sticking by, instead of focusing on the format of a calendar, focus on the use of a calendar in its entirety. Focus on the use of reframing your mindset to focus on growing rather than just achieving something in the now. These types of large, sweeping, consequence-filled, really, ideas are important in productivity more than anything else, in my opinion.
That's fantastic. So then do you start with where it is that you want to grow to and then work back from there? Or is it something that you just know kind of where you want your path or journey to take you and putting in certain principles that allow you to get there?
With growth, you're speaking on goals, and goals are a very, I made a whole episode on goals in particular because they're so unique. They're unique in the way that they are very, very human. We build them directly into everything we do. We say, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And it's extremely natural, of course. Obviously, everyone forms goals, even if they don't intentionally form them. But that's where I try and focus on is the intentionality of these goals. You have to set them not in a mindless manner, but you have to set them in a way that amplifies your success as much as possible. Doing so can focus on different kinds of goals. Take, for instance, input and output based goals are the two very simple metrics for defining them. So we have input based goals where we define the actual result of what we do based on just directly whatever we put in. Say, I really want to write a book, so I focus on writing 30 minutes a day. This is an input-based goal. It does not matter how many words I write in that 30 minutes. All that matters is that I do it for 30 minutes. It's not output-based. And input-based goals are very good for these like creative pursuit type things where they don't necessarily have a deadline. They don't have anything hard that can be set in place, and you can't force them. With output-based goals, again, these are goals that we focus very much on the final results. We focus on the final product. Say, for instance, if I wrote 1,000 words per day, um,
Hmm.
again, this is very helpful again, but it's helpful for a different reason. It helps me hit a hard deadline fast. I know exactly when I will finish 90,000 words or 100,000 words or however many I'm going to write for my book. It can be very helpful in meeting those hard deadlines, but in general, I wouldn't recommend using them for these creative pursuits. And the reason why is again, because the quality ranges so much in those 1,000 words. I can write 1,000 words and it can be gorgeous, perfect poetry perfection. Everything is amazing. Or I could write 1,000 words and it could be total gibberish and be completely useless to the reader. Um, when it comes to these creative pursuits, people tend to assign output based goals kind of willy nilly. It's not that output based goals are bad, it's just that you need to be intentional with the type of goal that you're intending to use.
Absolutely. So you would say you would recommend input-based goals for creative types or creative pursuits, and output-based goals if you have a hard deadline. Does
I would
that
say that's a
Amanda?
general principle to stand by.
Right.
It is
Okay.
not necessarily always true, as there's, again, in productivity, there's very few things that line up with every single person.
What would you say is your least favorite attitude towards productivity?
My least favorite attitude towards productivity is this I'm going to call it bro productivity because honestly this is the weirdest type of thing that's just run rampant, and particularly in the past few years. This idea of I wake up at 3 in the morning 2 hours before I go to sleep and I start my day with a 10-mile run, this type of just ridiculous, almost like pursuing these high level CEO type routines.
Mhm.
It's really not helpful to most people. These types of ideas, they kind of warp people's perception of productivity, and they think that every single person who's pursuing it is trying to turn out like one of these weirdos who wakes up at like 3 in the morning, right, to go for their 10-mile run. And they've run 15 marathons in their lifetime. And what you'll notice about this type of mindset is it places, first of all, crazy high expectations for people.
Mhm.
So first off, they're setting themselves up for failure. When you set your expectations for yourself so unbelievably high, it's not necessarily that you can't complete them. It's that when you eventually fail one of these days, you will completely abandon the task altogether. I'm not saying that you can't wake up at 3 in the morning and run 10 miles. I'm saying it's unlikely that you're going to do that 365 days a year for 10 years. And
Right.
what happens is when you set this goal immediately, when you miss it one day, all of a sudden just completely abandoned doing everything that you were doing well. And that can be hard. And really, with habits and these types of um, you know bro productivity habits, they focus so much on achieving the quote unquote unachievable, or achieving what these, again, high level CEOs, these, barely human type people can accomplish, instead of focusing on what most people are willing to accomplish.
Right.
It's also a matter of, if you want to throw away your life trying to pursue something that's, really made up by a lot of people. There's very few people who follow these routines actually legitimately, but there's a lot of people who claim to follow these routines. And really, I don't think it's good for anyone. I think it just, again, sets people up for failure. It makes people demean their own actual accomplishments, because, say for instance, someone, feels good about waking up at, a good time, like 6:30 in the morning, 7 in the morning, completely normal. That's completely fine for 99% of people. um and they do some light exercise, they run a half a mile, that's good. That's not bad. In no way is that bad, but instead people will tend to gravitate towards these inachievable heights, and they'll just be sad about their own accomplishments, when that's already better than most people by a huge
Right.
margin. These simple pursuits really have a big impact, and when you demean your own accomplishments like that, you're never going to get far. And it's kind of sad to see people abandoning productivity altogether due to these weird inaccessible heights of bro productivity, as I'm going to call it, because I think honestly that's where it stands with these like weird male dominated gym types that really
I can do it. I can bench 400 pounds.
oh yes, it's very odd, and I don't think it's good for anyone.
You know, I have to say myself, I often fall in that trap, often after New Year's resolutions, because I'm like, I'm going to do all this stuff this year. And then I try to do it all within like the first month because I'm like, you know, do it or kill
Yep.
myself trying. And that's really not good at all either.
No, because consistency is the biggest thing with these habits, right? It's, say for instance, a very small goal. I'm going to read a book 5 minutes a day. That's really easy for most people. Most people can do that very easily. But some people will, instead of setting this easy goal that they can easily replicate and keep doing for years and years and years with no problems, and if they miss it one day, it doesn't really matter because they're like, oh, I only missed out on 5 minutes. But what people will instead do is say, oh, I'm going to read for 2 hours a day. That's hard.
Right?
Clearing out 2 hours a day is a very different thing. And again, it's not that you can't do it for a week. It's not that you can't do it for a month. You might be able to. You're not me. I'm not really sure what you're able to accomplish, but it's a matter of, are you going to be able to do that for years and years? That's what
Mm.
is really important. It's all down to what's easy for you and what helps you in general. And it can be really hard to diagnose what's really helping you and what's not. If you really want to find out if something's helpful or not, try and take it away for a week and see what it changes.
Oh, that's a really good
You know,
idea.
you'll find out whether or not it was helping you.
I'll find out whether or not it's a waste of time. No.
And
Um,
remember, scientific method, only take away one part at a time, because otherwise, if you take away like three parts, you won't know which affected what.
See, genius. Each person's going to have their own system based on whatever works for them. But what kind of things can they look for in something as they implement it?
It's consistency. Making sure that whatever system you have set in place, that you are consistent about your system, consistent about improving it too. Consistency is really, really helpful. It lets your brain kind of relax when it comes to the method, because otherwise you have to do a lot of thinking. And that's what we're trying to avoid when we're setting up these systems, is we're trying to avoid thinking about the system itself and instead focus on thinking about what we're actually doing. Another thing that's really important to me anyway, that I stress a lot in my podcast, is simplifying. There's a great chess player, Jose R. Capablanca, who he was notoriously famous. He was alive before world champions existed, but he was pretty much everyone considered him the best at the time. And he focused really heavily on simplification. He thought that the purest form of chess, or the purest form of playing, was in a very simple game. And I think that's very true in a lot of different things. And in productivity systems, it remains very true as well. If you set up a system that is very simple to follow and that you can easily and consistently go through every single day or every week, every month, it doesn't matter. As long as what you're doing is simple and consistent, likely it will be very helpful for you in some way. Now, to the degree of which it can be helpful is going to vary on the person, but making sure that whatever it is, takes very little thought to accomplish, takes very little time if possible, and overall is just a net gain. I see, especially kind of in this bro productivity category as well, looping back to that, there's this other kind of unattainable type of standard that's being set. In particular, with like note taking, I see it a lot, and bullet journals. There's
Mhm.
these types of Instagram pages where they'll set out these beautiful notes that look like artworks rather than notes. And these completely abandon the idea of simplicity and consistency, because I know people who, again, they set their expectations for their notes for college on these types of crazed notes. And, trying to do that for 40 pages of a lecture is completely ridiculous.
Right?
If you're not going to be able to do that long term, or most people won't be able to do that long term, again, you might have a lot more time than I do, but frankly, I don't have the patience to do something like that. And I don't think most people do. And again,
Right.
with this simplicity, setting out the system, you have to make so many decisions regarding like color choice and all this. That's completely ridiculous. You don't need to do it. What you really need is you need a simple system that you can easily replicate and can help you think about the actual task at hand rather than thinking about the color choice of your notes or whether or not you should make a word bold.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. Other than what we just talked about, are there any techniques that you would say? Because usually when I try to be productive, I stress myself out. Like, I'm like, oh God, I have to do that, And so, and it's happened. You can ask my therapist. But is there anything that you would recommend to kind of, chill and just be productive, not give up on the productivity portion of it, but still, maintain sanity?
When it comes to just chilling out, I'm frankly, that's something that I really should look into. It's something that I haven't really struggled with a lot of my life. I know a lot of people who do deeply. I'm a study skills tutor, so I deal with a lot of people who come in right before taking tests and they're jittery and that type of thing. And though I don't necessarily have firsthand experience with it myself, as much as I know very commonly most people do, there is a lot to be learned from trying to, again, I think simplifying your systems. When people focus really hard on the system itself rather than what the system can do for them, what tends to happen is their brain gets really crowded um, with a lot of just really unnecessary parts. You have all sorts of different decisions that you have to make throughout your day, and trying to limit the unimportant decisions that you need to make can really help you focus on the big decisions, these big things that you must get done. And when you can start focusing on these big problems, you really will find that you're a lot more efficient at doing so. There was a study recently, I think it was a few years ago, that found that making decisions of any kind, it doesn't matter what size, leads to what the researchers call decision fatigue, where just making a lot of these very small decisions, you say, for instance, you have a good and a good introduction to it is you're going to brush your teeth, right? And you have two tubes of toothpaste. Making just this decision of do I grab the right or left one counts as a decision towards your decision fatigue.
Oh.
Again, you most people would think this is such a small decision, why does it matter? But really what these researchers found is even these tiny minute decisions when repeated tend to make people very tired and very poor at just doing anything. Setting your environment in a way that can simplify your life, setting your entire systems in a way to get out of your way as much as possible, really can help you focus on doing good at what's important.
That makes a lot of sense actually, because usually on days that I do have to make a lot of decisions, even if it's just my kids peppering me with like, "Can I watch TV or whatever?" It's like exhausting.
It's
I'm just
very
like,
exhausting, and they can be
let's
super
just
minute decisions, like
right.
incredibly minute that you would be like, "Oh, yeah, wah, I have to choose the right or the left toothpaste tube." But it's totally true. At least that's what the research has shown.
Now, there's often a lot of little interesting things like that about brains that you're just like, oh, well, that makes sense. It's kind of weird, but it makes sense. I know productivity varies from person to person, but what's something that you do in your life that you find really useful?
So recently I completely redid my note-taking system. Before I had done these really atrocious, just random notes, basically stored in Evernote, if you know what that is.
I do.
It's oh, it's awful. It's a terrible system of note taking. It's almost like a library that just never gets accessed ever. It's where ideas go to die. You basically take these notes and you put them in Evernote and you never look at them again, and they are now trapped in this endless vault of knowledge that no one will ever use for anything. I completely redid my note taking system with a much more experimental and pretty crazy method called the Zettelkasten, which its name is, strikes fear in the hearts of millions. It sounds quite intimidating, but the idea is pretty simple. The basis of it is you carry a small notebook with you. In my case, I just use my phone because that's easier. And any ideas that you have along your day, take these notes. Any original ideas that you have, or if you are going to quote something, make sure you absolutely address that it is a quote from someone so you don't end up stealing later. And eventually, when you get done, you go back to your Zettelkasten and you go to the system where each of these individual, very short notes, very short, maybe a sentence or two max, you take these notes and you refine them into your own words, a more, just a better method. And you put each of these into like almost their own note card. Um, in my case, I do it digitally. You can do it with physical note cards if you're crazy. um, but the idea is you build up this storage of a lot of these very small original ideas, or if they're not original ideas, they are directly cited, so you know exactly where they came from. And what you do is you link these notes together based on your thought process behind them. So, say for instance, here I'll pull up mine. I run them in a program called Obsidian. There's a ton of different programs. It doesn't really matter which one you use. Um, Say for instance, I have a note called work, and I have this one small note that working is all about efficiency.
Mm,
Um, Very small note, right? It's very simple. But efficiency, I have linked as its own note. With that, I can see the connection between efficiency and following efficiency. I can say that condensing what I wrote about efficiency is condensing whatever you do into deep flow will reduce the amount of time that you have to spend and improve the quality of the work produced. Focus on quality of time spent rather than quantity. Again, it just keeps going. And now I have another link to a note called work, and you can keep
mm,
following this. And what's really interesting about the Zettelkasten is how many of these notes you build up with time. Because I have a relatively small one. I have about like 300 notes in it so far.
mhm.
But people will get, over the span of their lifetime, thousands and thousands of these notes, and they'll have these chains of thought built into the note system itself. And when you're going to create creative work, like what I do with my podcast, I can go to write a script or a rough script for my podcast, and I'll find one idea I know I had from like the week before or something, and I can just follow my own trail of thought in order to create a rough draft. And because it is your own thought process or it is directly cited, you can basically create a rough draft in like no time flat, and it will come out so, or at least it has for me, so much better than if you tried to write it originally. Because instead of taking these ideas that you came up with, in a few hours while you were writing your script, instead it's over a period of weeks, months, maybe even years. So you have this crazy cool note taking system that really is all about outputting information and really going back in and following your own thought process versus something like my old Evernote system where things went in and I never touched them again. This is one that you keep diving back into and you keep reviewing over and over again. And with even just that reviewing, even if you aren't going to finally create something with these notes or create a bunch of small things with these notes, just that active review of information helps you sort it out in your own mind as well and can help you think a lot more. It's the coolest thing I've ever implemented into my productivity system. And I really cannot stress enough that people should try out these interesting systems that they hear about if they're interested in them and they're motivated to learn how to perform them in a very efficient way and in a simple way. Again, these take very little time. The Zettelkasten takes very little time per day. I probably spend about 5 to 10 minutes per day working on it. But over time, it grows and it saves me so much time when I go to write something. And whatever I write always comes out so much better than what I would have come out with normally.
Right. That makes a lot of sense because you're basically writing down your best thought on whatever it is idea that you had because you're keeping it short. So you're compiling all of these awesome thoughts that you had into one awesome masterpiece.
Exactly. And that was the entire idea behind the system. And it's not new. It was invented in like the 1700s by some crazy guy. Basically, he ended his life with 80,000 of these note cards that he had connected through like these weird codes.
I'm picturing like this giant board that you see like when they're tracking serial killers, like all these
Yeah,
like
with all
lines
the
connecting him.
Yeah, I'm sure he wrote like 80 books. He was a
Oh wow.
sociologist in his time, and he basically credited it all to his weird note-taking system. Create everything to be very simple, very easy to access. You will do it a lot more, and you'll get a lot more benefit out of it.
Yeah, I could see that being productive in your day to day, just in tasks, because my brain is so ADHD. I'll think of something, and then that'll lead me to something else, and then before I know it, I'm way off task and have done nothing. So if I can just jot it
Yeah,
down,
yeah,
that would be
exactly. And
awesome.
then it's out of your head. You don't have to think about it.
Exactly, it relieves that brain space, but also just as you and I are both creative types, and a lot of the people who will be listening to this, I'm sure, have their own creativity, whether it be in the business realm or they might be writing a book or just in their everyday lives. That could save a lot of time if you can just eventually go back to these works and just really compile them. Wow, I'm gonna have to try that. I'll get back to you, see how it works.
There's a great book I read. It's a very short book. It's called How to Take Smart Notes by Sonka Achen. I think that's how you pronounce his name. Great book. It's like 150 pages, really short, and it basically details the whole experience of the Zettelkasten in a much better way than I can. We'll say, and if you really want to get into trying it out, I'd look into that. It's a cool system, and if anyone can find any of these weird systems that really interest them and they think that it will help them, I encourage you all the way. Try it out. See what it does for you. Lots of people can take away a lot from these different systems, and even if you don't adopt the entire system just as a whole, you can still take parts of it. These different components can be taken and swapped around to help you as much as you really need to be helped.
Absolutely. And I think with productivity, just as with any tool, it's really there to help you get to where you want to be. So, like you mentioned, you implement these small goals and that helps you grow as a person. You don't have to make the productivity is not your end all be all. It's the tool that helps you do what it is that you want to do. So, one of my personal philosophies is that every person is here, to follow their passions because that spark within them is there for a reason. So we all have these passions of things that we love because that's what we're meant to do with our lives. And so my podcast is focusing on helping people find that and then implementing tools to help them get there. And so I'm really, really happy that you came onto my podcast because I think a lot of people will gain value from hearing what you have to say. Because I'm totally going to take that note idea because that's going to be phenomenal, especially since earlier I interviewed a guy who talked about how to write a book. So this is going to be good. I'm going to use it to write my book.
Start using the German note-taking methods. You'll become a god.
Before we wrap up, where can our audience find you?
Again, simplify. I've got a website, theproductivitypodcast.org. If anyone wants to check it out, they can also check out my podcast on, basically any platform, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anything really. I'm on it. Just look up the Productivity Podcast by Brison C, or you can check out my website that has a link to it.
Well, thanks to everyone for joining me for this episode of the Business Essentials podcast. Today we spoke with Brison C, and he told us how to establish a routine for productivity and not stress ourselves out. Anyway, guys, thanks so much for joining me, and we'll see you next week.
You've been listening to the Biz Essentials. Thanks for listening to the show. We hope you've gotten some useful and practical information, learning how to be productive, be successful, be joyful, and more importantly, be yourself, and turning your dreams into successful passion projects. By listening to this show, you've already set into motion the most important part, starting. So it's important to catch the next episode. Make sure to like, rate, and review the show. In the meantime, hook up with us on social media at Veronica Ventures and at the Biz Essentials. Till next time, this is the Biz Essentials.
Here's today's quote of the day. Robin S. Sharma once said, "Productivity is less about what you do with your time and more about how you run your mind." Catch you next time on the Business Essentials.